The macro machine versus the easy toss. CombatEx, Greg IdrA Fields. This should be a classic, except it's on Metalopolis. And as a student of the game and someone who has watched a plethora of CombatEx, I know that it is a habit. CombatEx always cannon rushes Zerg on this map because you can do a low ground cannon rush. And there's also a bit that he does where he ostentatiously challenges his opponent to, oh yeah, let's play a money match, and he'll always wait until they're on Metalopolis. Like if you've been watching the last two videos, Combat got laughed out of the game and embarrassed in 2 macro games, but now that it's on Metalopolis, he knows, okay, yeah, I'm just gonna cannon rush, and also there's no neutral depot on these old school maps, so I haven't seen these games in forever, but I know that Combat, anytime he's on a losing streak in this era and it comes up Metalopolis, he's going to do the cannon rush. The same is true of him in 2012. If he was behind in a series, or even in a series, and it was a mirror matchup on Ohana, he was going to go proxy gates on Ohana like every game. He did it versus In Control in the show match where he got embarrassed, and he did it versus Parting on land, and Parting held. So, IdrA going hatchery first here, he droned all the way up to 15, and IdrA misses the first scout. So oftentimes in the Venomous Classic series on this channel, I talk about how flimsy and frail Zerg is early. And think about how little CombatEx has been able to do in these matches. In both games 1 and 2, essentially all he accomplished was killing a corner base with the DT, and IdrA sees a probe, and it's going to be the 3 pylon block for Combat Easy. IdrA cancels the drone, he's going to put a pool down, and remember, you couldn't do this in tournament maps after, probably like 7 months after this. Blizz Joke was too stupid to fix it, so all the map editors took the existing ladder maps and put a neutral depot at the base of the ramp. But we think about games like the double bunker block versus Jinro as the 2 cannons start there at the base of the ramp. IdrA desperately looking for the probe. IdrA doesn't find the probe because if he doesn't, then Combat will simply win. He's looking around and there it is. And IdrA is just not going to be able to defend this and he's going to leave. So if you're wondering what happened there, essentially once the cannons are on the low ground, they're in range of the mineral line. And that means that all you have to do is have a little bit of vision and the Zerg player won't be able to stop it. Remember, no Ravager, and you're really just screwed there if you're Zerg. 3 range Queen, the Nidus was worse. It's funny because now Zerg has so many options and is so sturdy, and it is so safe to play Zerg. And the people who weren't around in Wings of Liberty like cynically look at like the consistency of Zerg player like Rogue and say like, oh, well, like, look how easy it is. Like, you just make a bunch of queens, lol. Like, look in this era. There was a game where IdrA played CombatEx and destroyed him, like, walked over him as he should. Then they played again, and the same thing occurred. Combat was embarrassed. And in the second game, it was like, where the hell was his army? And then they played again, and Combat basically got to walk in IdrA's base and get a walkover win. Now, oftentimes, whenever we think about imbalance in IdrA's career and like Wings of Liberty in 2011, it's not that polarizing as far as the disgusting aspect and like, wow, someone who's really just god-awful can win undeserved like that. Because a lot of times what happens is like, it's a tournament game and it's a LAN, and the games that I show you guys are between good players. So it's like Jinro double bunker blocking IdrA because they spawn in close. You're like, oh, I guess that's weird and it seems kind of dumb, but I guess it was just part of the game. Like if you watch this series, you see like what an animal CombatEx is. Like you see that he gets walked over in both the macro games and just can't even hit his force fields. And then he gets to collect a free win because he builds 3 pylons at the base of someone's ramp. This is why IdrA said Starcraft 2 is fucking stupid. This is why he preferred Brood War to Starcraft 2. And this is why they put depots at the bottom of ramps, because it was just an absolute disgrace for games to end like that. Chill, Combat IdrA. Try working with that. Protoss greater than IdrA. There's a classic IdrA quote. Then he says, I destroyed you the 2 games where the players mattered. And he's completely right, as usual. This is why the career of IdrA is worth revisiting. because every little witticism like this that he made was right. Like, if we look at the things that he said, like the famous argument with Day9, Zerg cannot scout. Day9 comes in he's in the state of the game call, and he's arguing with IdrA, saying like, just like doing the hardest copes imaginable for an intelligent person like Day9, like, yeah, tic-tac-toe, you always go in the middle because it's better, so if everyone picks Protoss, that means the game's balanced. Games will always find balance. And it's just like some of like the dumbest coping I've ever heard. Like, I love Day9 and he's a great guy and like a hero of the scene, but in that argument he got embarrassed, and like honestly he put himself in a position where he showed that he wasn't necessarily going to be honest about game balance when it came to being able to get the maximum amount of viewers and hype the scene of Starcraft as much as possible, and not be labeled as like, oh, the guy who hates Terran. Or like Day9 knew that if he was like, yeah, Terran's imba, Terran's stupid, that when he did the next Terran Day9 daily, people were going to sit there and sneer at it and be like, oh, like you said Terran was imbalanced. Now we're going to get a 3-hour episode on like this guy walking out with Marines on Steps of War and killing a guy. So that was a famous moment where Day9 like argued in the public light, and IdrA was almost like sneering at him with disgust in terms of the fact that he knew like how imbalanced the game was. He lost games like that against CombatEx on Metalopolis. And you might be asking yourself, well, if IdrA and Combat played like 100 times in Brood War, like what do you think the win-loss would be? Probably like 97-3 for the Graken. But in StarCraft 2, we see how easily IdrA dominates the macro games. Like I said, all Combat was able to do in 2 whole games was kill 1 base. And he's talking the whole time, he's being aggressive, he's trying stuff, like he's not horrible, he's out on the map, like he has map control. I'm not saying that he's like brain dead or playing terrible. The point I'm making is IdrA in this era was infallible. He was an exceptionally brilliant macro player, and to lose games like the one that he just lost, in many ways that defined his career. If you watch the Gregathon, which is a series I did where I revisited all of IdrA's GSL games, you will remember that many of the runs, his GSL runs that people were so hyped for and stayed up till 3 a.m. to watch, they just ended because of dumb map imbalance. Like, oh, we spawned close. Zerg, it goes from being like Zerg 44% win rate to like Zerg 34% win rate. And the crux of the issue is that sometimes you could defy severe map imbalance if you were playing a flawed person like CombatEx, who's like more concerned about, you know, telling you you're worthless than he is like getting his robo started on time. And as Steven Destiny Bonnell once said back when he was actually a StarCraft streamer, never prioritize your BM over your macro. And in terms of Destiny quotables, I think that's the best one ever. That's something that you guys should remember. Never prioritize your BM over your macro. Oftentimes IdrA would take advantage of his reputation, and he was a guy who would, of course, be cut out in like a very linear way, have a very steady reputation as a macro player. That's all IdrA does, macro, macro, macro. But we can see here going for a Roachling all-in against the mouthy CombatEx on the open map, Zelnaga Caverns, looking for a bit of revenge after getting ruthlessly cheesed last game. Here are the surprise Roaches. More sentries than Roaches, though. IdrA runs the Lings around the back. Combat throws up some force fields, and more Roachling is going to come in here. And no SimCity for Combat, playing very greedy. He was playing off of IdrA's reputation. It's IdrA Fields. He's not going to cheese me. Pylon there on the high ground will let Combat warp in on the low, but that's going to hurt more than it will help, as this is a brutal reenactment of when Dan released the Graken. IdrA Fields crushing CombatEx, who's cowering at the top of his ramp. Tawdry trash talk forgotten, as IdrA has the natural completely locked down. He's messing with the ramp to be cute, but at the end of the day, he can kill that natural whenever he wants. He's just pressuring as much as he can. Doesn't want to get cut off by force field or bleed units, but he knows he can kill this base, and blood drones behind, but he doesn't really want to play a guy like CombatEx, who he assumes is stream cheating, and let's be honest, probably was in this era. Combat sort of stopped stream cheating when he came back for HOTS, but yeah, in this era, he would definitely stream cheat. So, IdrA saying, could you stop searching for a while after this? Because he wants to play a real game. I want to play someone who's not brain dead. That's beautifully put, Greg. As IdrA kills that base, he will crash down upon the probes, start to butcher the army of Combat Easy, who pedantically says, "Dodging me?" As though like the last 40 minutes have been nothing but high comedy. This is Greg IdrA Fields playing from freaking Korea, a guy who can get games against top tier god legends like Nesteen MVP to play a guy like CombatEx is magnitudes beneath him in his eyes. And for us, it's just like a hilarious morality play. 3-1 versus a guy that plays SC for fun. It's SC2. That's not an excuse for being this bad. I miss IdrA so much. Holy shit, he's so funny. He smashes the base there. Notice he's already flooded drones as natural. And you think CombatEx is gonna leave? Like, he's really far behind, but like, do you think he's gonna leave too? And again, Combat, classic Combat, consistently talking, not only consistently talking, but being dishonest and being completely unaware of the situation, or not having any real idea of how to really comport himself in any manner, being a complete animal. And that's part of what made him funny. IdrA making a couple roaches, O-U-U, I think he meant like U-O-U, like the anime face. And it's funny to me that like Combat would take this line of assault because he himself is like obviously very committed to Starcraft and wanted to win. You know, it's just one of those things where like anytime you're playing a game and someone's like, "I'm not like a nerd like you playing this game," it's like, dude, you're telling me that over the same fucking game. You'll see this in team games like Counter-Strike a lot, where some guy who's being terrible or isn't doing his best blatantly will be called out and he'll be like, "Well, dude, like, I'm not going to sit here and try hard and ranked." And it's like, well, there's casual. It's sort of the same thing here. It's like Combat has been absolutely ran through this entire series despite running his mouth constantly. The one win he got was about as an illegitimate of a win as you can possibly get. And he's like saying, he's talking like he won. He's 3-1. Yeah, does that ring a bell, Combat? You're 3-1 versus the guy you're running your mouth to that's better than you. Yeah, oh, I'm 3-1. Guys, he's 3-1. Just like versus Chill. So the thing about this is there's no Ravager. And this was a very interesting thing where if you look at the way that Ravagers affected the matchup, in many ways, like, it really screwed up ZVP and completely changed the way TOS had to play and made it where they did more obnoxious adept stuff, as we see a Dark Shrine here for Combat. Overseer already out, and I think Combat probably has a pylon around that bot right little path. And remember, you had to have an Evo chamber to make a Spore in this era. Again, something that made it more difficult to play Zerg and made it where it was easier to die. Like, if this is me versus Combat, like he's on one base, I make a spine in each base, like just to be a little extra safe. But I mean, IdrA's a top-end macro player who was a god tier Terran in Brood War. He's defended against Tawdry GT harass with limited detection. And just think, like, if you didn't have that little Evo chamber restriction, he could have just basically made a Spore at each base and a spine at each base and never died. But instead, it became this thing where he had to juggle it with both army, APM multitasking, and unit allocation macro. Way harder to play Zerg at this era. In this era, the Queen has a Tawdry 3 range. You can't just make Mass Queen for defense. Notice IdrA had to take that weird third base way off in the middle of nowhere. And this is one of those things where you're playing some obnoxious cheesing shithead you've played a bunch of times in a row, and you just want to get it over with, and you know they're going to draw the game out and be obnoxious and do search again, noob, says Combat. You know they're going to do stuff like draw the game out on purpose, make DT, go like hide Stargate, hide bases. It's just one of these brutal things if you're playing Starcraft where you're playing against someone who's an animal and is trying to make it miserable on you, but you don't want to try to end it prematurely because that's how often you can throw your lead. So IdrA vs CombatEx. Combat steals one and thinks he's a god for doing so. Sub for more.